Hey, kia ora e te whānau. Welcome to the official March edition of the New Zealand Collective. Welcome to you all. Kia ora, team. How are you all? Thanks for coming in.
Great. Kia ora. Great.
Kia ora tātou.
Let's do this. Let's start the show by saying who you are, what you're about, in case I'm sure everybody knows everyone here. Let's tell us who you are, what you're about, and that guy down below me, they might not know who he is, but everyone else, I'm sure everyone knows who they are. And then let's have a chat about what we're doing, what we're talking about tonight. Shane, why don't we start with you?
Kia ora mana tātou, ko Shane te pau ahau, tūhoi te iwi, nā te raka te hapu, maunga pohotu te maunga. My name is Shane te pau. What do I do? Well, I'm a bit of a blogger, I'm a bit of a writer, I'm a bit of a vagabond. I try to be much more of a vagabond than a writer and a blogger. I'm currently on my OE. Spending a year out of Aotearoa. I'm in Vienna today. I think that's Craig's old stomping ground. I think he went to university here. But whānau, I can tell you one thing. I'm going to be back to fight the next election when Willis takes on Chippy. That's my prediction, and that's the prediction of Jamie the punter Daly. There you go.
So Willis v Chippy, you reckon? It's going to drop that
Willis
down.
v Chippy. Only a matter of time, folks. The clock is ticking.
Samar, do you want to tell us about yourself?
Sure, kia ora tātou. My name is Samar Huruai Sagar. I was born in Iraq and moved here about 25 or so years ago. And I live now in Ottawa, in Ngāpuhi land with my husband, Pere, where basically we run an activist platform called Aotearoa Liberation League. And we are kind of just wannabe media commentators. And yeah, that's what we basically do full time.
I think that's I mean, I was going to say that's all of us. I guess that's me too, Samar. We won't do that too, right? Craig, what about yourself, sir?
Well, kia ora katoa. My name is Craig Rennie. I'm the economist and director of policy for the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions, Te Kawe Kaimahi. That's my day job. I'm very much not here wearing that hat. I spend my evenings annoying the Tories on Twitter, and increasingly less so on Blue Sky. I didn't go to university in Vienna, Shane, although I have been to Vienna. It's a lovely place.
Okay.
Prague was where I went to university.
Okay, there you go.
But very much pleased to be here, and very much looking forward to talking to you all tonight.
Thank you very much, sir. And I haven't checked this with you yet, Craig, but we might have a bit of an announcement to make at the end of tonight's show. So
yes,
people who are watching right now, if you stick around to the end, there's a world exclusive announcement coming up for you. Kieran, who are you again?
Kia ora koutou, good everyone. Kieran McAnulty. I live in Masterton. I'm a Labour MP, and I went to university in neither Vienna or Prague.
We replayed your commentary with Bishop this week, Kieran, and we thought one of the best comments of the year so far is you fighting for the Masterton Oval to be the national stadium. We thought that was genuinely genius. So you should go for that.
I'm yet to hear an argument against it.
So for people who haven't seen this before, this is at the moment sort of a monthly podcast where people from the left, ardently from the left, proudly from the left, get together and speak about issues of the month. And I guess it's also a way for us to reach other audiences, put our products in front of, other content creators and commentators' audiences. So I saw someone in the chat say we're eating well tonight. So everyone can continue to eat from one another. And that's sort of what this is all about. Right. Oh, I'm Pat, by the way. Just, you know me. That's fine. I don't have to introduce myself. I'm Pat. I'm from Ōtepoti, and I'm kind of a podcaster. It's actually strange saying that out loud now, but that's sort of what I'm doing full time. So I probably used to be a broadcaster, but now I'm probably a podcaster. Don't know, something like that, and hang out with my mate Chewy 4 nights a week doing BHN. All right, let us get into some topics of the day. We are going to talk tonight about police numbers, gang numbers. We want to talk about Israel Gaza later on tonight, especially because there seems to be a fair chunk of news around. There's always news around it, but at the moment with students being pulled off the streets in New York because they've attended protests, and then here in New Zealand, lawyers screaming in the face. It just seems to be something at the moment agitating. And of course, the Oscar winner who also got kidnapped in the West Bank. There's stuff going on at the moment that feels just a bit different from the last few months. Not that it's ever been good in the last, since October 7th, and it's continued on. But we'll have a touch on that a bit later on as well. I'm certainly not the expert in that area, and there are some people with us who have much more wise and should be listened to much more of their opinions on these sorts of things. Anyway, let's start, because Kieran, we've got you for a half hour. So we want to start with what's happening in the House. And one of the stories from the House this week, what we'd love to touch base on with people, is Te Atatu. What I'll just do is I'll just play a little bit of audio and video first of all to set the scene, and then let's have a chat. So this was Te Atatu in the, what do you call this, Kieran? I was going to say the House. This is like the foyer of the House, yeah?
Tiles.
Yeah, it's an area called the Tiles. Yeah, it's a little foyer that ministers have to walk through to get from their offices to the House, and that's where the media congregate.
Yeah. So the politicians are literally on the tiles every day, like figuratively and literally, maybe. Anyway. So this is Te Atatu. She's on 3 News, and she gets asked some comments that she made, I believe, in sort of a panel for maybe for the university about police and what's happening in Wellington. And this is what she had to say.
I believe we should defund the police altogether. I think there are some functions that the police are currently carrying out that other people would be better suited at.
It's la-la land stuff.
I think that the police should be responding to incidences of domestic violence, sexual violence, things that only they can do. I think beat patrols is an easy thing that can be substituted for by Māori wardens, by hapai ake kind of community people walking around, which we have in Wellington, and I think they should focus on their core business.
Paul has the backing of her co-leader who says people feel unsafe around police.
I can tell you that there are constituents who I do deal with, namely those who are currently experiencing homelessness, who absolutely feel that way.
Labor not lending any leniency to its partners on the left.
I thought that Te Atatu's comments were ill-informed, were unwise, and in fact were stupid.
Chris,
so there's another part to this. So that's one part of the conversation that Te Atatu's been quoted on. The other part is when she was talking more to what she is being told. We hear that is happening to homeless people in Wellington as well.
So one of the big complaints I heard last year especially was around beat patrols just picking up homeless people's stuff and putting it in the bin. When I inquired about it, they said that that was because it was a Wellington City Council bylaw, and I don't think that that should be what they're dedicating their resource towards.
Leading to a pile-on from the government.
Oh, look, I thought it was quite outrageous and insane, to be honest. It's just weird, to be honest.
Really, she's for anarchy.
Pretty divorced from reality.
Paul is the Green.
So they're the first 2 comments I want to play. So we can talk about. There are some more things to get to as well, but that's the first 2 parts. It seems to me, and what I thought we could do is if we can get to an agreement basically of what's been said, then we can bounce off that and go, what do we think about that? It seems to me that what she's saying is it's been said to her by some of her constituents that they feel less safe when there's more police around. That seems to be the first point she's making. The second point, it says she's having reported to her that some homeless people are having their belongings picked up and put in the bin, which appears to be a Wellington City Council bylaw. Do we all agree that that's sort of what she's been saying? Are those the 2 points that have been mulled over today, or does anyone want to add to that?
Well, I'll add this, and actually I agree with you. I think there are some functions that the police are supposed to carry out, don't carry out, and ought not to be carried out. And those are welfare checks. Those are that is dealing with people who have very complex mental health needs. And when we say we want to defund the police, what we want is we want a shift of resources from one area of so-called expertise to another area of expertise. So I think that's the other very important that point that Te Atatu was making, which I support.
Yeah. Anyone else jumping on that?
Well, I mean, the comments that were in that story are one thing, and I agree with the underlying theme here that there are 100% people in New Zealand that, for societal, historical, and cultural reasons, have grounds not to trust the police. And also, I agree that there is a call, and certainly in some communities, to adequately resource the likes of the Māori wardens to perform a supplementary role in addition to the police. But I don't agree with defunding the police in order to achieve that.
Do we think that, I mean, one of the problems the left had in America is they use that phrase defund the police, which got interpreted as, and I understand why, meaning take all money away from police, whereas that's not what was being called for. What was being called for is reallocate some of the funding to police to people like mental health workers, because they could serve a better purpose in a particular situation. Is it just I guess what I would like to know, maybe you can answer this, Kieran, is we know that. I mean, surely Chippy knows that as well, that no one's saying let's abolish the police completely. It's a call for reallocation of some funds to make actually the money work better. Isn't that what that phrase actually means, albeit a clunky way of saying it?
Well, I mean, you can only go by words that are said, and I didn't know that. And so I imagine there are many other people that don't know the background to the use of that phrase. I mean,
Okay.
I'm looking at this from, a member of parliament who engages with the police and engages with all aspects of society and hears a range of views. So I'm certainly aware of the concerns amongst some, a small part, but nevertheless, it's worth acknowledging that don't trust the police. I live in a rural area that don't have enough police resources. So I'm never going to advocate for defunding the police. But what I will do is advocate for additional resources to the likes of the Māori wardens, who I've seen firsthand have played an integral part in de-escalating critical situations that could have got very bad because of their standing in mana and connections in the community. And so, but the thing is that this has become this massive, complex, nuanced yarn about do you agree with it or not. There's so many points that are being made, some of which many people would agree with, some of which some would not, that it's not as simple as saying, yeah, I agree with Tam Paul or I don't.
If I can just jump in here, it wasn't simply a matter of Hipkins saying that he does not agree with Tamitha Paul. He came out and called her whakaaro stupid, which, if I can add, is actually extremely gendered language, along with calling her insane and in La La Land. This is actually relying on stereotypes of women being irrational and emotional and incapable of forming reasoned arguments. So, and this is actually this is a continuation of Labour's support on these so-called tough on crime policies that have failed time and time again. We talk about the definition of insanity. That's repeating policies that have failed time and time again and expecting something different. And when it comes to Labour, they've said that they want to support to keep the gang patch legislation, for example. And the gang patch legislation has resulted in military checkpoints outside of Tangi for Māori. So for them to say that they support this, and for this, what I would call an authoritarian attack on her ability to criticize the state and to say something that's extremely mild and to receive that vicious response, I think it does signal that we are shifting to a greater police state and that Labour is going to double down on that, which they've signalled in numerous ways.
Well,
I don't think Chippy actually said that the Talonheads was in La La Land. I believe that was actually Mark Mitchell, or as we like to call him on this show, Mark Mitchell, who basically used those terms. And you're absolutely right. There was a lot of gendered language, but I don't think it was coming from Chippy at the time.
He said
can I make a point, which is sort of at the risk of saying this? Why can't we have both? We're currently 71 police short of where we were at the last election, right? We've got a target of having 500 more police. We're miles away from that particular target. We also need more emergency housing. We also need more mental health spending. We also need more drug and alcohol, counselling, right? None of these things are forthcoming from this government. All of those things would support people right now, right? But we're having this conversation, right, rather than having the conversation we should be having, right, which is that meth use has doubled in the last year, right? We're not having the conversation about the fact that violent crime is up 9%. Violent crime under their category, right, from 2 years ago. We're not having the conversation about getting people into emergency housing when the government chucked tens of thousands of people out of emergency housing and doesn't know where they're going, right? There's plenty of things here, right, for us to get into, right? Whether or not Thomas said the right thing or the wrong thing, kind of right? We can all have an argument about whether or not the police are liked or not. I come from the northeast of England. Trust me, coal mining villages were not big fans of the coppers, at various points in time. But
this is the conversation Tamitha wanted to have.
Great. In which case, we should be having that conversation.
Yeah.
But instead, they called her stupid.
Well, hang on. Let's just give Kieran a chance, because there's been some big words there about what Labor does and thinks does. Kieran, you've got every right to reply and share some thoughts.
Look, the way I approach politics is you criticise or respond to what people say. You don't attack the person. And I acknowledge the comments that disagree with what Chippy said, and I stand by him in criticising the ideas. But what I don't stand by is the Prime Minister actually attacking Tamitha and calling her insane. That's not on. That is
Yeah,
not
can-
on it. And I actually acknowledge the points that you were making in terms of attacking Tamatha and who ultimately was putting forward her view. And you shouldn't have a crack at the person.
Look-
But just in response to the comments about the gang patch, we haven't said we support it. We opposed it vigorously. It's an absolute waste of police resources and time. But what we have said is, look, well, it's in now. Let's wait and see how it plays out. But we haven't committed to keeping it. But with the greatest respect, it's not the same. We've opposed it. We voted against it, and we're trying to channel our focus into the key things that we see affecting working people. And we're going to have a manifesto that touches on every aspect of policy across the board, but we're going to be focusing our attention on certain areas. It doesn't mean that we support it, and it doesn't mean we're going to keep it.
Can I just say a couple of things here? Mark Mitchell, the hypocrisy falls out of his mouth. Who's defunding the police right now in 2025? Mark Mitchell is 71 less cops on the beat. He moved a whole bunch of cops from Auckland to the CBD, because of the political pressure, but that means less people being supported in critical areas that aren't in fact the CBD. They're the Mangere, they're the Otara, they're the Papatoetoe. I think 140 back office skivvies have been ousted in terms of their jobs. If they're not doing the administrative jobs, who's doing it? It's the Bobby on the beat. Who's defunded the police? The Nats have defunded the police. That's the reality.
I want to have a look just to make sure we're on the same page again. One of the things Tamatha was talking about is hearing from constituents that feel less safe when there's more police around. And I don't have a list of who said what about that response, but I certainly know that the government, pretty much came out attacking her on that. And the thing that's interesting to me is the police say that. The police have research and their own reports that say that communities most at risk see police as threat report finds. Police systems, processes, cumulative experiences are still getting in the way of fair and equitable policing, according to a new report. An independent panel has been researching police engagement with Māori, Pacifica, disabled people and rainbow communities. The 85-page report is the second from the Understanding Policing Delivery panel. The first, released in August, relied on existing police data, found Māori men were more likely to be stopped, tased and prosecuted by police due to bias and structural racism. One last comment, which I think is important from this report. The referencing back to what Tamatha said, the communities most at risk do not feel they were well served by police, instead seeing them as a threat to their safety. Childhood police interactions in particular were seen as compound ongoing distrust in police. So what she's saying there is accurate. And I wonder, Kieran, is there, I guess when I heard what Chippy said about it was a stupid comment, I was just wondering, maybe I'm being a bit pedantic, is there a way of supporting the premise of what Tamatha was saying? Because what that's saying is accurate without sort of not necessarily he piled on, but the adding to the pile on, maybe, is what I'm wondering.
Yeah, well, and we run the risk, of course, if I comment on this, then we may well add to it further. I'm sure there's plenty of people that are watching this that might wish to report on it. But so I want to be really clear. I've the utmost respect for Tamatha Paul. I work alongside her. She's the Greens housing spokesperson. I'm the Labour Party housing spokesperson. We work together in opposing what the government is doing in essentially making people homeless. So I'm just going to stick to the fact that this is a very nuanced situation, that if we pull back from what happened in last week, do I agree that there are some people in the community that don't trust or fear the police? Absolutely. And as you've said, they recognise that themselves. The drive when we were in government to recruit 1,800 additional police, there was a massive focus on diversity to make sure that the incoming police force reflected the community that they served. That was the first time that that's ever happened. And so beyond that, I don't really want to add to what some of those others were saying that were attacking Tamatha. I'm just not going to buy into that. She's got a view and she's expressed it. I've got while I agree on the fundamental points, it's not how I would have communicated it. And coming as a representative that lives in a provincial area, I want to see more resources for the police and more resources for those that support them, and that's my position.
Can I jump back in?
Yeah,
and
go,
just
Simone.
clarify that Labor, that Hipkins did explicitly come out and say that he was going to keep the gang patch legislation. So sure, I can concede that they didn't support it at the time that it was passed, but they are going to keep this legislation, which is extremely harmful and breaches basic human rights and freedom of speech. And secondly, Indigenous, the Maori women represent the most incarcerated Indigenous women in the whole world. So, and those statistics are also very bad for Maori men. So the gall of Labour, who, by the way, oversaw those statistics with even a slight increase from 60 to 63%, to then come out and say that that Tamitha Paul, as a Maori woman and as a representative of those constituents, can't even come and speak the basic truth to the reality that they're experiencing, not only being overrepresented in prisons, but also overrepresented in being beaten up by the police with batons, with dogs, and with tasers. It's just biggest belief that they would now come out and attack her in this way. And it goes to show that, in my view, Labour is not part of the left. They're not allies of the left, and I would never categorize them as such.
Well, can I say,
Well, hang on.
you know,
I think you should give Kieran just at least a chance to respond.
I'd like to say one quick thing, please. When the brothers stop wearing swastikas and Nazi regalia in this very fractured world, I will be more supportive of them. They need to cut that shit out.
Kieran?
It's not working.
Well, look, I mean, at the end of the day, what makes this show great and the way that we conduct politics and democracy in this country is that we have views. I mean, no one's expecting me to agree with that, but I'm pleased to be on a panel where we can have a discussion about it. At the end of the day, we all want to see this a one-term government. I obviously think that Labour Party is quite clearly encamped in the left. We are born of the trade union movement. We exist to support working people in this country. That's why I joined the party. We might have disagreements on certain aspects, but we will never support a national-led government. We will never work with ACT. And unless New Zealand first fundamentally change their current approach, I think it's highly unlikely we'll ever work with them. So at the end of the day, the Greens, Te Pāti Māori and Labour, we have a common objective, and that's to make this a one-term government, and we work really hard every day to achieve that.
Can I ask you a question, Samar? You just said that you didn't consider Labour to be part of the left. I mean, I do. Where's your line? Like, what does someone have to do to then no longer be a part of the left? Like, what are the must-dos to stay on the left, so to speak?
Just advocate for the interests of the working class people. And that's not what Labour does. They oversaw a crisis in COVID. And what did they do? They transferred a whole bunch of wealth to already rich people and cemented inequality in this country. And again, when it comes to the so-called tough on crime policies, what did they do? They brought in this ram raid bill, which actually lowered the age of prosecution for some children to as young as 12 years old. I could give countless examples of the way that they've thrown working and poor people under the bus. So I think the line, to be honest, it's not that high. But Labour has been miserably failing again and again and again. And every time they're in power, they fail to do anything transformational. So why should we trust that they're on the left? They've also never given a cabinet position to the Greens. And you look at how the National treats the right-wing parties, they give them power over the whole government. And so you can see that they can empower minor parties if they wanted to, and they choose not to.
Craig, you want to jump in?
If I may, sort of, forgive me, Sam. During COVID, we saved 20,000 lives as a consequence of the actions of the Labour government. We saved thousands of jobs and hundreds of businesses. We kept the economy going, right? We did all the things right, right? I don't believe any of that is not in the interests of working people. We lifted tens of thousands of children out of child poverty with the families package, with the changes in 2021, right? We did all of that, which is in the interests of working people. We delivered fair pay agreements. They were late, but we delivered fair pay agreements in the interests of working people. We saw the living wage rise above inflation every year. Again, in the interests of working people. I work for the trade union movement. My job is to make sure that those who don't have a voice, those who feel powerless at work, those who live in communities where they're losing jobs, have fear about their future, that we give them voice. And we do that through the Labour Party. That is the political arm of the trade union movement. And
I have a love and sometimes... Sorry, Craig.
Sorry, Shane. So
No,
there's plenty of things that have been done over the past Labour government and over previous governments, working for families, KiwiSaver, so much which has changed the landscape positively of this country, right? To say that the Labour Party is not part of the left, I'm sorry, that's just not true.
And look, I have a love and not so much love relationship with the Labour Party. There've been times where I've, particularly during Rogernomics, but the other thing is that every single socially progressive thing that we live in our society came from the Labour Party, with the work of the Greens, with the work of the Alliance, 4 weeks annual leave, homosexual law reform, the establishment, actually, of, let's go back, the establishment of the Treaty Tribunal. These are things that have come from the left, and far from perfect. I want to push it further to the left. I want a fairer tax system. I want a system by which everyone is taxed equally. So if you're my brother, it's on minimum wage, he gets taxed. If you're a landlord like I am and I make a profit, I ought to be taxed. So there's a lot of mahi that we need to do, but the reality is, at the end of the day, I don't see much other option than a national-led coalition or a Labour-led coalition. And my gosh, after a year of this government, I've had enough. Even a bad Labour government is better than these folks that we've currently got in now.
And look, I can agree with that. I can agree that Labour is slightly better than National. They often give us crumbs. The way that I describe it is that National comes around, it beats us up and convinces us that we deserve the very little crumbs that Labour gives us. And that's what happens time and time again. And I agree that Labour is going to be better than National, but my argument is that we lose nothing from voting for Greens and Te Pāti Māori. Absolutely nothing, because we know that they're going to align with Labour and they're going to push Labour further to the left.
Kieran, we're at past, and you said you had a half hour, but I feel like the conversation has sort of wound to talking about Labour and Labour policies as well, so it feels only right and proper to give you the last word before we say see you later and thanks for your time tonight.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm sorry I have to go. I'm actually quite enjoying the yarn. It's an important conversation to have.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, politics is changing in this country like it is around the world. Politics is becoming quite volatile. You've got a prospect of one-term governments happening in other places around the world, and it may well happen here. I think debate internally or even amongst allies like this is incredibly helpful. We're not actually at odds in terms of the fundamentals that drive us. We have disagreements in terms of how it is applied practically and in practice. But I think at no point in what has been a really interesting discussion has there been anything that would think that we don't have the common objective of making this a one-term government. This national-led government, alongside which is being influenced disproportionately by ACT and New Zealand First, is consciously looking for distractions to take attention away from what it is that they're doing. They are driving division amongst our society, and they are causing hardship to those who can least afford it for the sake of reducing spending. And emergency housing is the prime example of that. They swear black and blue that their policies aren't hurting people, yet the people that actually know, those on the front line, are telling the truth that it's the opposite. And the only thing that drives them is to reduce spending. Now, I'm quite happy to take flack from parties on our left, but at the end of the day, we've got to change the government together.
All right, Kieran, thanks for giving us some time tonight. We'll let you go and talk to you another time.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Kieran.
the opportunity. Good to see you.
Yes, Kieran.
All the best.
Hey,
I've got a question for you, Samar, just based on that conversation. It's really interesting. because you said very clearly that the smaller parties on the right are basically, you didn't use these words, but they're basically holding National to ransom to form a government. Is some of what your criticism of Labour about actually a weaker, smaller left parties? Like the Greens and the Party Māori could do the same, couldn't they? Couldn't they hold Labour to ransom to get some more of their things through? So some of your maybe anger, maybe the wrong word, should be aimed at them as well, going, come on, you've got more power here than you think, you should push more.
I don't believe that it was because ACT and New Zealand First held National to ransom. I believe that this was a collective agenda, and we saw in the language that National was using in the lead up to the election. They made it very clear that they were running an anti-Māori, anti-co-governance agenda. They're fully united on this. They're funded by the same individuals. So no, I don't think it's a result of them forcing their hands and, Greens and Te Pāti Māori sucking at negotiations. I genuinely think it's because Labour is not aligned with those more leftist policies, such as transitioning to alternative methods of justice.
Now, it's a fair point, because you're right about the build up to the election, what National was saying, and they were in that same camp. Craig and Shane, do you want to say anything about that conversation just before we wrap up? And sort of, we're going to stay in this area. We're going to move a little bit to police numbers and gang numbers now, which is kind of a part of. But just to finish up with whatever what we've just had, anything else you want to add?
I don't disagree with anything the sister is saying. I think it's just maybe you get a bit conservative when you get older. It is about deliverables, but I have seen some very good things that Labour has introduced. Sometimes I get frustrated with the incremental nature of it, and perhaps we should be a little bit more revolutionary. I was disappointed that we didn't use the mandate that we gave the Prime Minister at the last election. We can say, well, COVID come along, but a simple thing, the collective bargaining, fair, what was it called again, Craig?
Fair pay agreements.
Fair pay agreements. They should have been introduced at the beginning of the terms. They should have been entrenched, and that would have meant that the employers and the government could not have unscrambled the scrambled egg. So there's a prime example where you have the opportunity, you got people on side, you got to move, and you got to do it quickly, and we didn't do it in that respect.
Craig, anything?
Only very briefly for me, which is just that I actually don't think we disagree on the end point here, which is that we want better policy on housing, on income security, on poverty, particularly child poverty. We want better policy on unemployment. All of these things are heading in the wrong direction right now. Right? And they're heading in the wrong direction, and they're causing the exact problems the police or Māori wardens or whoever has to pick up on the streets of Wellington or Auckland or Christchurch or anywhere else in this country. And as a consequence, those are the things, when we hear this nonsense from the National Party about this policy, we should just be saying, hang on a second, stop. That's actually not what's important here. What's important is the fact that there are 159,000 children living in material poverty in this country, and that number's going up. It's not going down. The fact that you don't know where people from emergency housing are going to. Why don't you know that? Right? Why is it that unemployment is rising and we're losing someone to Australia every 4 minutes? Right? Those are the things we should be saying.
Wow.
Your distractions are, it's just there just to distract from the fact that your policies are actually failing. And we need better policies. And that actually requires all three parties on the left to work together to make sure that in the 500 and odd days we have before the election, we can make sure the public knows there's a better alternative to what's on the table from National and ACT and NZ First.
I think what annoyed me about the weekend when Chippy said they were stupid comments, and then Carmel said something the next day. It wasn't quite as harsh as that, but it was something along those lines. Was it feels to me like, and this is just my opinion, you may disagree with it, that each of the parties that sit on the left, and I do put Labour in that, have a role to play in building a coalition. And it feels like Labour are the centre left party, so to speak. And then the left, the further left are the Greens, and Te Pāti Māori kind of floats around, and they all have their own jobs to do. And it feels like the Greens job, one of the jobs the Greens have got is to activate that further left base that is typically more apathetic than the centrist base, and the Labour's job is to pull some of those quote unquote swing voters back to them that went across to them to National last time, but are now freaking out with what National's putting through. And so they need to be a team to do it. And it felt a little bit like when Chippy said that was stupid, it was like, why are you shitting on a teammate? You know, this is you giving fodder to to Luxon to go, look, even Labour thinks they're stupid. You know, that was the thing that upset me. I was like, it's like you can disagree or be in a slightly different place or have a different role, but not shit on your teammate. That's how it felt.
Yeah, that's fair. And I don't know if we can add any more value to that. We need to treat each other. The reality is that if we are going to govern again, it will be with the Greens and perhaps Te Pāti Māori, and we need to be respectful of each other as we lead up to the election. There's a lot of national vote, a lot of ACT vote, a lot of New Zealand First vote that we can scrape together. And let's not forget, folks, 200,000 people, traditional Labour Party people, did not vote at the last election because they didn't think it was worth it enough. Because what was our great policy? No GST or fruit and vegetables, you know, and it just didn't motivate people enough.
I was going to say, and Shane, right now, the polls are telling us the government isn't popular, right? Right now, the polls are telling us the public wants change. It wants positive change. It wants to change. The country has buyer's regret on the decisions that were made at the last election, right? We've got to work together to make sure that we have that policy, that thing that's going to get those 200,000 voters out. In 2017, we had the families package. We had Best Start, right? We had the winter energy payment. We did first year free for tertiary education. Right? Yet there are students who are saying their fees going up by 6% this year. They're going from first year to last year free just to save the government $900 million. Right? Where we've got rising youth unemployment, and there's nothing from this government at all to tackle any of these things.
Look, I think from a strategic perspective, if I was a Labour and the Greens, I would go after the elderly vote that seems to be traditionally support Winston, but they've been very let down by Winston. They got a slight rise, I think, to where inflation is at this year, but nothing the year before. And the tax cuts, I think the average kaumātua got $2.50, where I got $22. I think there's a lot of despondent, and you know, when they try to distract by you saying, oh, woke politics, and you know, having a crack at the guy from the Kiwi Bank, but when actually there's less kind in your cupboard, and you've got a winter power bill, thank Christ for the winter energy bill, but power's going to go up by $10 a month. And it's going to compound. That's a huge issue for many people. And it's a type of issue that Labour and the Greens can get right and get some unity on, because really those are the issues that count the most.
But what we need is more than just, you know, winter energy payments or subsidies to just further enable these massive power companies to charge exorbitant amounts. We actually need to tackle the issue at the root and stop these power companies from having these monopolistic structures and able to charge whatever they want. And that's what we need from the government, some transformational policies. And Labour, it's to me signaling that they're not going to bring anything like that to the table. And hopefully with the way that Hipkins is digging his own grave, those 200,000 people will come out and vote for the Greens. And hopefully over time we can transition to a Greens majority party that's supported by Labour. That's my ultimate dream.
Well, I know it's a dream, but is it? I know it's a dream, but is it a reality? Why is it that the Greens don't do particularly well in Mangere, in Manurewa, in Papakura, but they do okay at Epsom, they do okay in Auckland Central, but when it comes to the sort of quite important working class issues, there's not the traction there. So I'd like to ask you why that happens.
I think there's definitely a disconnect there, and a lot of poor people and people that we are connected to here think that the Greens is too woke, and that they are worried about too many culture war issues, for example. So I think that the Greens, though, has been doing a good job in reorienting themselves, talking more about capitalism, talking about these big picture issues that people are connecting with. I think that they can pivot, but I do think that you raise a good point, and often I wonder if we need another leftist party that's quite strictly working class issues and doesn't get distracted by other things that maybe people feel that they can't relate to.
One of the problems, I mean, Craig, you're probably better than me to speak to this, so correct my incorrect statement. But one of the problems seems to be that the working class don't really seem to exist anymore. I mean, if you see who the working class were 50 years ago in the factories, that was the blue collar worker. A lot of those roles don't exist anymore. So I actually think the makeup of who the working class are is different today from the traditional roots. So who quote unquote owns the working class vote now, Craig?
Well, I'd say first things first is that the working class are people who work, who have to trade their time for their labour for cash, right? And those who own capital aren't the working class, right? And in terms of who is the working class, it's a huge body of people, always has been and always will be in New Zealand. It's a very broad tent of individuals. In terms of the big political parties, the kind of mass organised labour that existed in places that had very heavily unionised sectors, in the private sector, that's disappeared. We have approximately trade union membership in the private sector is about 9%. In the public sector, it's about 40%. And so overall, we get about 20% trade union membership in New Zealand. So that ability to convey, spread messages, convey political messages, to do political education in those sorts of workplaces, it doesn't exist in the same way.
No, but
so there's real challenges in doing that. That's why fair pay agreements were so important in helping to bring back that sort of organization. It's why organizations like the Trade Union Education Authority that we used to have in the 80s, 90s, and early 90s will be so important in helping to bring back that sort of communication and the central mission of progress and being able to communicate both ways so that political parties can see what the needs of workers are because they're communicating with them more regularly, and workers are able to communicate to political parties what's actually important to them and how in their day-to-day lives policies can make a real difference. And that's where, and that's where I still think the Labour Party still has a really important role and still is a really important organisation in helping to channel that conversation and to deliver the alternative message to the National Party, which is the party of organised capital. And we're seeing that with the tax changes that have been made at this election. The landlord tax changes didn't come about by accident. They came about because organised capital created them. We have a job of work to do at the next election to make sure that in the Labour Party, we're speaking to the issues that really matter for workers, which are the cost of living, which are the health service, which are housing. And that's why I think, you heard Chippy speak at the State of the Nation. He talked about, jobs. He talked about health. He talked about housing, because those are the issues that, the public are telling us are really important to them right now.
Can I just quickly add something to my last answer to Shane, please?
Sure.
In terms of that perception of the Greens, being out of touch, I do think that it has in very large part to do with attacks like the one we just saw on Te Atatu, the media hysteria, and the way that politicians often frame the Greens as being, silly, have stupid ideas, or have insane or radical ideas. So I think that's a big part of why they don't receive more support. I think if they were framed fairly, as well as Te Pāti Māori. Like, I remember sitting down with my parents about Te Pāti Māori. They weren't convinced. They thought they were radical. Sat down, actually looked at their policy profile, and by the end, they were like, they actually have the best policies. I actually think these guys are the most reasonable guys.
Well, that's like, there are a lot of people who think the Greens tax policies at the last election were superior to all the others. Certainly gave more tax breaks and certainly gave more money back than Nationals did, but no one knew about them because they were considered sort of, as you say, a bit silly. These guys don't know money. They're just all about trees and stuff. So but then again, that's on the Greens. They need to change that perception. And obviously the opponents of the Greens are going to keep driving into that perception because they want it to stay. So that's sort of their job. It's their job to advertise their product and educate the system, as hard as that sounds. Okay, sorry, is there more?
I'm really, really keen to talk about gangs and the rise in gangs numbers. Yeah, well, let's
just continue the conversation. I'm just going to, because I won't bring up any footage or anything, because what we do here in this show is even a little bit above and beyond good or bad policy. What we'll do is we'll hold this government accountable to what they held the last lot to, because that would be hypocrisy if they didn't, and to what they've promised. Now, what they promised was 500 new police by the end of this year. Be that good or bad policy. So far, they've got 13 new police in 14 months, and they've got 487 to get in the next 9 months to not be another broken election promise. On top of that, Christopher Hipkins in particular was hauled over the coals by National when they were in opposition for every pickpocketer in any part of the country for being soft on crime, especially around gang numbers. At the same time of that, for the police, gang numbers have gone up by 600. Now, as I said, good or bad, right or wrong, they are failing in what they said they would do, and I'm happy to open it up and talk about it, and then we've got one more topic after that. So Shane, you were keen, mate. Off you go, son.
Yeah, I'm keen. This is the reality of an economic policy. Poorer people get, the more desperate they get, the more they look for something to belong to. I'm a child of Kawerau. In the 60s and 70s, we had lots of good mahi. We had great community spirits. We had very little gang. Now we're a gang-owned town. You know, we've got this meth bloody bullshit where we've said, right, let's put them in jail for 25 years. Let's we'll take all their possessions off them. But meth is increasing. When are we going to learn that these issues are economic issues? They're health issues. Meth addiction is a reality, but we treat it as a criminal issue rather than a medical issues. And what are we going to do? We're going to raise our prison muster by 10, 12, 14,000. And let me tell you, there's one way to grow gangs in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and that's to increase the bloody prison population. It criminalizes people. It does not rehabilitate. We know this. These are the facts.
Yeah, please. Anyone else? Jump in.
I mean, I agree with Shane. You can't imprison your way out of crime.
Yeah.
Right? Prisons just become the colleges of the next round of criminals, right? The longer you lock people up, the less services you provide for them whilst they're in prisons, the worse people come out at the other end, right? And as a consequence, simply reaching for the stick in terms of crime is not going to work. Can I just say on the gang numbers, Pat? I always take what Jared Gilbert says really importantly in this space, because he's a very sensible person in this space, right? And he said of the gang numbers that they're likely to be highly inaccurate. And the reason for that is it's really easy to get onto the gang register.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to come off the gang register. So as a consequence, the numbers go up and up and up, not because there are actually more people in gangs, but just because the police get better at recording names.
Yeah, to be fair, Craig, when National was in opposition, we said what you're saying, but all we're doing is using their yardstick to criticize that government, to now say, well, if you're allowed to use that yardstick for criticism, then so are we, or else you were either wrong then, happy to be right. So that's what we're doing. We're saying that, and, because there was also that thing about other numbers going up, or are we just finding out that there are more people who are on it who weren't counted on it before? There's lots of things. So we're just holding them to the standard they hold a lot.
Totally, and they juked the numbers because they said famously that the gang list had been, and their exact phrase was sanitized before it was released, in an attempt to try and reduce the numbers on the gang list to help give the government a good press release. And if you remember, on the day, that was when Christopher Luxon lost it, and he said to the media, it's not about the freaking targets, it's about the outcomes. If you remember, and he lost his cool at that particular point in time, right?
Why wouldn't we expect more rangatahi to join gangs? Their unemployment rate is at 25%. Minimum wage has not moved. There's a huge disassociation. Why wouldn't you not expect them to look for an out? And traditionally, what have they done? They've joined gangs. It's a reality of the economic times and the depowerment that many of our young people feel. That's why they join gangs.
And we can't have a conversation about gangs without talking about the history of gangs and the relationship with state abuse. And
Yes.
especially in light of the government just apologizing to those
Yeah.
victims of state abuse, but then continuing the same policies. We see that
Yes.
abuse at Oranga Tamariki is actually currently rising. And we have these
Yeah.
stories of police violence just over the last few weeks, you know, beating up a 15-year-old child and breaking his jaw, beating up a 77-year-old kaumatua and arresting him for being homeless, but also using a dog and a taser on a man who ended up being killed. So all of these, you know, they don't, they exactly as Shane said, they disconnect people. They disconnect people from communities, from themselves, and they seek community somewhere, and they're seeking it in gangs. We know this. The evidence is there. We've gone over it in so many studies. But this government is an anti-evidence government. It's also like a post-truth government. And that's what these attacks on Tamitha Paul signal, because she's just saying the blatant truth, and they're asking us not to believe what's in front of our eyes. It, you know, reminds me of John Key back in the day saying, if you want, I can find you a lawyer or an academic to back up a counterpoint. And we've just seen them gone down that track to the point now where they're not even bothering to give us any examples of evidence to support their policies.
I couldn't agree with that more, Samara. I think, you know, it's a great phrase, a post-truth government, because it's absolutely right. Many of the statements that they've made, be it on crime, be it on the economy, be it on housing, right, are not only not true, they're like maliciously not true. They're deliberately telling you a lie in order to make you believe one thing when the real data is telling you something else, right? And increasingly, we've got government by it's like performance art rather than real government. They're sort of, you know, they're on a stage telling you everything is fine, and if you look out the window, you can see it's not. And so I think, you know, that there's a real job of making sure that when we're talking about gangs, as you say, we talk about it in a sensitive way. We talk about it in a way that actually says, well, why do, as Shane said, why do people join gangs? They join gangs for security. And why do they join gangs for security? It's because they haven't got any, all right? They haven't got a job. They haven't got an income. They haven't got a house, right? And someone comes along and says, I can offer you money, I can offer you protection, and I can offer you a future. And if you haven't got any of those things in the town in which you're in, right, they all sound massively attractive.
See, Craig, I absolutely agree with you about information and a post-truth government. But, you know, I think that we collectively, the four of us and the listeners, we need to actually take some responsibility for this. I think we've allowed the gutting of the public service, bloated bureaucracy to occur far too much. And we're talking about information. There's going to be no information available because the people who are responsible for providing the information, providing the data, are no longer in the system. So that void will be a reality.
Yeah, that's a massive part of their attacks on the public service. It's just attacking the data collection, the research, and, you know, even as far as defunding archives in Z and things like that, these libraries of information. I definitely don't think we've pushed back enough on it.
How do we do that? How do we push back other than one-term government, which we hear all the time? What do we actually do to push back?
Well, we can't let the lies go. We have to consistently and repeatedly point back. The first time we get sick of saying it, right? Because we hear it all the time, and we get sick of saying that's just not true. That's just not true. That's not true. The 10th time we say it is the first time somebody hears it in the public, right? And we have a job to do in public voice. We also have a job to do to elevate public voices, to elevate the voices of people in communities that aren't heard, right? You know, workers who are losing their jobs in Tokoroa, right? They need their voices heard about what's actually going to happen to their town.
Yeah.
Right. Workers who you know, are impacted by the closure of Smithfields, right? Meatworks, right? Need their voices heard whilst this government sanctions live meat exports, right?
Yep.
We
and
need
what
to
a
be
bullshit!
lifting those voices.
What a bullshit artist Winston Peters was. Going down to Tokoroa, who organised, who got the community involved? Tamitha Paul, actually, because that's her hokanga, that's where she's from. And what did he say? Oh, I'm talking to the ambassador. We're going to fix this. But when the factory closed down 6 weeks later, he was nowhere to be seen. Nowhere to be seen.
And to me, we have a job of work, Pat, to consistently and repeatedly go out there every time the government puts out a number that's dodgy, to say that's not true. every time they put out a line saying this doesn't work, show me how, right? Every time they say this policy will work, really, right? That's our job, as I say, in the 500 and odd days until the next election. That's what we have to do.
Yeah, and the issue is that our media is not doing that work, right? And it leaves it to people like Pat and Chewy to do that on BHN, and people like us who are just like, severely underfunded, just doing it from our bedroom. And one thing, and if I can say this while I've got Craig here, is that the unions, I think, could do a slightly better job of their media, like advertising protests more, having people on the ground to film the protests, to record them, having good audio, having good visuals. That can go a really long way. And unions are one of the, remaining bastions of power in this country in terms of the left. So, there's a little bit of power, there's a little bit of money there. I think that unions could do well to invest in communicating their message.
One of the things about the trade union
I agree. I agree, and carry on, Craig.
One of the things we
I despair about that. I despair about the outlook for our media. I think we've been collectively silent, and I'm going to take some personal responsibility about this. I'll write something in the New Zealand Herald over the next couple of weeks. It might be the last column that I ever get published, if they do publish it. But the alt-right takeover of NZME needs to be called out. It's bloody dangerous. And if this very litigious billionaire or whatever he is from Canada can come over and knock over NZME, TVNZ, Radio New Zealand, spin-off, newsroom, all become very vulnerable. So, I'm really concerned about this. I think this is actually one of the greatest fundamental challenges to democracy I've seen in my lifetime.
What I would say, Sama, in response to your point about the trade union movement, is that I don't think anyone could accuse us at the last election of being on the fence about what about where the direction of this country. I don't think anyone could accuse us of not putting up posters around the country demonstrating where we stood on the various issues. You did right. We could, there's always better ways of communicating, right? And hopefully we can communicate ever better, right? With workers, with communities. I'm as keen to, right, as anybody else, right? Because I spend my life borrowing other people's megaphones to tell the world that this is dumb, or this number doesn't add up, right? I think we all have a job of work to do. But the one thing I would say is that you said we have a bit of money. Never underestimate the poverty of organizations on the left, particularly the trade union movement. I think between us, right, we wouldn't have 1/10 of the advertising budget of Just Act, right?
But
so we have to
Craig,
use our
Craig,
differently.
What we do have? I tell you what we do have. We have the community.
Yeah,
we have the
true.
audience. Like, honestly, we do. This is the time to go to people watching now. This is where you get involved.
Yeah.
Because when you share Shane's posting on NZ Herald, when you share a BHN click, when you share an Aotearoa Liberation League clip, that's your part in getting out there.
Yeah.
We've built this BHN thing over 3 years. I've worked for Newstalk ZB. I've done that, right? I've never seen community like I've seen around these left-focused things.
You've done a great job, Pat and Chewy. Great job.
Thanks. I wasn't looking for the pat on the back, but thank you.
No, but you deserve it.
I was going to save this till the end of the show, but I just feel like it's kind of appropriate now because people are watching right now, and there's 600 people watching. We want to keep doing this, not just we as in BHM, but we as in the ecosystem on the left. So here's some breaking news for your whānau. Craig said he likes to borrow other people's megaphones and put stuff out there. Well, on the BHN DOC studio platform, we are soon to be launching Craig Rennie's podcast. It's called Locked Out with Craig Rennie. So Craig Rennie will not only be borrowing other people's megaphones, but Craig Rennie will have his own megaphone. And in April, that's the target, Craig? Sometime in April.
That's right.
If you're watching this on YouTube, it'll be on YouTube. It'll be on all the platforms as well. Craig Rennie, Locked Out podcast will be launching. Do you want to say anything to that, Craig, before we move on to our last topic?
Just very briefly, so my executive director is currently dressing the studio downstairs, which is the most important thing apparently. But I'm really keen to hear from listeners, really keen to hear from the public. What are the numbers that they want investigating? What are the numbers that they hear that they go, what, right? When the government says something, right, and you go, does that make any sense? Send me an email, right? We'll work it out, right? Our job is, and hopefully what this podcast will be doing is weekly, is going out there and saying, well, hang on a second, we've heard this. Does it stand up to any scrutiny? And if it doesn't, why not?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't go up to stand up to scrutiny, who's pushing what line and why? And it'll also look at the numbers that are coming up, be they unemployment numbers, GDP numbers, poverty numbers, any other numbers, and we can say, what does good look like before the government gets its chance to get its first lines in? So you can be prepared when you hear what those numbers are, and you can be prepared for actually, well, actually, that's not a good number, or this is what this means, and this is who's winning and who's losing. So that's the task. That's what we'll be trying to do on a weekly basis. It won't just be me. We'll be trying to bring in experts every week to tell people what's really in the numbers, and trying to fulfill that job of putting on a different voice, not just critical of the government, but just critical of, well, why is that there and how does that work?
And let me say, there is one other podcast that we have confirmed and we're working on in the background, potentially two. So we're going to add to the ecosystem of the left and what they're saying, completely independent of what me and Chewy do. If you watch me and Chewy, their own product, their own content, getting out there and sharing their knowledge. Excellent. So there you go. We broke that even earlier, Craig.
Awesome.
Okay, team, let's get on to the last one, shall we? Let's talk about what's happening there. I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, you guys, right? But it feels like at the moment in particular, in America and around the world, there is a different response and upscaled, even hotter, as in there's more heat in the conversation than of the last, say, 6 to 12 months of conversations going around to do with Israel and Gaza. We all know about the lawyer Paul Fisher. We all know he's got form on yelling at people. But what we're also seeing, this was just over the weekend, I believe, a Turkish student in America, I think in New York, who onlookers say the masked police officers that took her looked like a kidnapping was happening. So if you're listening to the audio podcast,
you don't look like it. Why are you hiding your faces?
So that's an onlooker talking to the
Can
police.
I see some faces here? How do I know this is the police? Seems like bullshit to me. Certainly looks like it.
We've seen that as well in the last couple of weeks with Mahmoud Khalil as well.
You're going to be under arrest. So turn around.
Okay, let's not. Okay, he's not resisting. He's giving me
And then in the West Bank, we saw the Oscar winner taken. It just feels like things have become even more heightened than usual. And I just wouldn't mind throwing it to you guys. I think I want to start with Samar. I want to throw it to you guys and see what your thoughts are around, I mean, open dialogue conversation, but at the moment, things feel like they're more heated than usual, especially in the area of pushback. Protest seems more heated than usual. Samar?
Yeah, absolutely. As the genocide has resumed, the anti-Palestinian narratives have only grown in the West, and Western media is not reporting at all on the fact that the United States is slipping into fascism faster than ever, that they're abducting random people off the street, disappearing them, and also that they're sending immigrants to offshore dungeons where they face really severe human rights abuses. None of this is covered in our media. Neither is the questioning of our relationship with the United States in the first place. Should we be aligning ourselves with the United States? Should we be building greater military capacity with the United States as they fund a genocide, as they openly and celebrate funding a genocide? We didn't even get criticism over really any media pushback of New Zealand supporting the bombing campaign of Yemen, an already devastated, impoverished country. And then they extended that deployment for another 6 months. Very little pushback. They even went with the government to the United States, and all of their questions there were pathetic. Absolutely zero pushback. And yeah, we're just seeing to be honest, this is an acceleration of policies that was also the fault of Labour, because we had actually Helen Clark begin the regular meetings with NATO, and in their words, bring us closer to NATO than ever before. This continued under Jacinda Ardern, who also maintained a really good relationship with Biden. And now this government's come in and said the previous government is anti-American, which just shows you that they want to push us even more to the right, an even greater relationship with them. And we've got AUKUS to worry about. We've got all of these things. You know, they're antagonizing China and wanting to turn the Pacific into a military playground. Huge issues that our media should be all over, and yet we're not. Of course, also, and I really wanted to bring this up while Kieran was here, but I got really taken away by our discussion, that Labour supported the genocide to begin with and didn't speak up until the moment that they...
Oh, no one's touched anything. It's a awkward time to pop off, but no one, no one's been cut.
Yeah, I think that's a bit rough, actually. I think that there are lots of activism within the Labour Party that have got.
Let's just go back to Samar. Let's just go back to Samar to finish your point, then you guys can respond. Finish your point, Samar. I don't know what happened there. No one touched anything.
I don't know what happened there either, but in terms of Labour's support for genocide, I distinctly remember, and I screen recorded it, when Ryan Bridges' interview with Hipkins, he specifically asked him, do you think it is aligning with international law for Israel to cut all food, water, and power to Gaza? And he said this twice to him, and both times Hipkins said, refused to condemn it. He refused to say it was a breach of international law, effectively giving it a green light. Meanwhile, they were throwing Naya Mahuta under the bus for not condemning Hamas in the exact way that Israel needed them to in order to start the genocide. So they waited until they left power, and then yes, they did speak out. And I remember that Damien O'Connor is the only person, as far as I've seen, to call it a genocide, and I have huge respect to him, and I think it speaks to his Irish whakapapa. But we haven't had enough, and Labour is not using their political power now. They're forcing Greens into Pāti Māori to use the very little political leverage that they have to bring this issue into the House again and again.
I can't, I mean, not that I'm saying you're wrong, Samar, but what I'd like to be able to do now is show that, to show the people, because there'll be people out there going, I didn't know that. I can't find anything on it. But so we'll leave that as said right now, because I think Shane was going to respond to it once you got
yeah,
Shane.
look, we collectively haven't done enough to call out the genocide that has been occurring, not just since the 7th of October. The 7th of October was horrible, what occurred, but this has been going on for 30, 40 years in terms of the disenfranchisement of the people from Palestine. And yeah, I think that we do need to be stronger, but I just want to say something to the sister. There are lots of Labour people that have been very involved in the Palestine movement for 30 odd years. So let's just not lump us all in together if we can. And I think what we got to do is we've got to get the Israeli ambassador back in front of the Prime Minister and got to hold him to an account. And if he represents a government that does not respect international norms or laws, perhaps it's time for him to go.
Kia ora.
Craig, anything to add in?
This is not an area where I have a giant level of expertise. I'll put that straight up here. What I would say is that perhaps I'm reading this wrong. Certainly, the Labour Party meetings that I'm involved in, the support for the Palestinian causes is not something I've ever heard wavered. And in fact, in many rooms, there's been strong and vocal support, not only for peace in Palestine, but for the Palestinian people themselves and for a just peace in Palestine. But this conflict seems much more about one person, and that's the Israeli leader and his desperation to cling to power.
Yes.
Because whilst he has conflict, he makes sure that he doesn't lose power. He forces the Israeli people into a horrible situation in which they're forced to back their military because he is creating a conflict deliberately to avoid being kicked out of power. The millisecond he's kicked out of power, there are several warrants for his arrest. So we end up in this horrible cycle conflict just to appease one person. And that to me is not a great place for us to be. But at the same time, and certainly, there's got to be better ways of dealing with the challenges in the Middle East than blowing up children's hospitals on television. We have to work towards a just peace here, whatever that is. But that's going to require a much longer and a much more patient set of political actors in the Middle East than the ones that we have right now.
Hey, Pat, I got to go. I got to go get on with my day. Lovely having a kōrero. Missing my whānau at home. I know that there's a few listening to them. Hey, Pat, good little story. You like this? At the marae, I think it was in February, talking about media appearances, he goes, and this queer of ours said, oh, I like those guys with the beard from the South Island. I watch them all the time. So there you go, mate. You're a hit and Waimana, Pat.
Perfect. Kia ora, Shane. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks for your time. Just to wrap up, because you guys put the link in there. I think I have a coding here. I can bring it up. Do you want me to do that, Samar, so we can see it?
I think people can look that up in their own time. It is still on YouTube. PM Chris Hipkins condemns Hamas attack, and it's somewhere around a minute. He asks him.
I found it. It's right there. Minute 31. Support the complete siege of Gaza. So,
I mean, you can play it briefly.
Well, I'll just play it, and because then people get a chance to see what you've said straight away, and then they all know. So I'll just play it. I haven't heard it. I haven't queued it up well, so we'll just see how this goes.
Other parts of the world. I think it's still too early to even really speculate on what a New Zealand contribution here might look like.
Has there been a request at all?
As I've indicated, I think we would look to make sure that we're supporting any multilateral, international efforts.
Have there been multilateral requests for our assistance?
Not yet, but there's certainly conversations happening.
But
there was a United Nations Security Council meeting. No particular outcome came from that meeting, but there will undoubtedly be international conversations.
Do you support the complete siege of Gaza, cutting off food, fuel, water and electricity? You've said that Israel has the right to defend itself. Do you support that right?
Well, Israel has a right to defend itself, but there are international norms in terms of what a proportionate response is, and we would expect that they continue to comply with.
Is that proportionate?
Look, I'm not going to make a judgment on specifics at this point. I don't think I'm in a position to be able to do that in an informed way.
What's the New Zealand government's position on a siege of food, fuel, water and electricity on the Palestinians living in Gaza?
Our position remains that New Zealand supports a two-state solution when it comes to the situation there. In terms of the specific conflict, I'm not going to take a position on a day-by-day basis about whether Israel's justified in its actions or not. I simply don't have enough information about what is happening on the ground there right now to be able to do that. And I don't think it would be a responsible thing for New Zealand to do.
Is what Hamas did.
So, to be clear, and this shouldn't require saying, but there is absolutely no justification in the world to cut off all food, power and water to an entire hostage population, because that is what Gaza is. They cannot leave from the fences around them. So this moment happened, and I can tell you, on behalf of me, my family, and so many other people who see themselves in Palestinians, we will never forget that he gave this green light to explicit genocidal intent. And the only one more thing I want to add is that in response to Craig, with all due respect, this is not just about Netanyahu. The vast majority of Israelis support the genocidal war, and poll after poll after poll. It's also a very long running colonial project, the last 80 years, the longest running modern occupation. So this is definitely bigger than Netanyahu. Obviously, Netanyahu is awful, but he is a representative of the Israeli attitude towards Palestinian. That is a very uncomfortable but true fact.
I would say that I don't hear Christopher Hipkins that you said giving the green light to genocide. I agree he could have been stronger, but I don't think it's completely to the other side of he's giving it the green light. I don't want to sound wishy-washy, but his statement to me feels wishy-washy and somewhere in the middle, but I would not say that was green light from my perspective.
I'd agree. I'd agree. I think we can do both things at the same time, right? We can condemn rightly, Sama, the removal of food, fuel, education, water, the right to travel, the right to just not be murdered in your, in your home, right? We can condemn all of those things and rightly condemn those things. But what Chris said wasn't the same thing as him then saying, and therefore I support genocide. I don't think that's the same thing. I think we can agree that what is being done by the Israeli army in particular parts of the Middle East is breaks all the norms of international conflict, breaks all the norms that normally would have countries hauled in front of the ICJ, right? But I didn't hear Chris say, and therefore the New Zealand government, of which he was representing at the time, or the Labour Party, therefore supports genocide. I think those two things are different.
So the reason I use the term green light is because he didn't explicitly put a red light and say, no, this is against international law. New Zealand condemns the blocking of all food and water and electricity into Gaza. And by doing so, he enabled and contributed. This was obviously not just Chris Hipkins. This was across the Western political spectrum. They all refused to condemn the explicit genocidal intent of Israel. And that refusal to condemn and call it out is what enabled the genocide to happen.
So you're saying because he didn't say no, he's tacitly said yes, even if that's not his position or he's not using those words. I understand what you're saying. I don't necessarily agree with you, but I completely hear what you're saying. Because the thing I would say, using the metaphor, you used the green light because he didn't use the red light. There's also the yellow or the orange in the middle. That might be a part of the conversation. But look, I agree with you. And I think I had a conversation with the mayor of Dunedin, Aaron Hawkins, once, and it was really interesting. At the last election, I spoke to all of the mayoralty candidates. And what's really interesting is what he, as the current mayor, couldn't say. And I saw it because all the guys coming on doing the I want to be mayor, were just so black and white with their opinions because they could be. He, as the mayor, couldn't be because his black and white position, I'm not suggesting this is a defense for Chris, I'm just saying the reality of it. His black and white position could have affected, I don't know, if the DCC's on the stock market or whatever, it could have made a tangible difference to functioning of things. I wonder if a Prime Minister faces that more so than the leader of the opposition or the leader of a minor party. I actually agree with you though, Samal. I would like to have heard him use those words, but I guess I'm thinking about the practicality of it as well. So it's, yeah, I mean, like, Chloe for Prime Minister, is that if Chloe was there?
Yeah, I was going to say it speaks to the limitations of the Labour Party, what you're saying, because I absolutely believe that is the case, that he was limited in what he was able to say. But just to reiterate, we're talking about genocide here. The stakes are extremely high. So while normally I would agree with you that he's not saying no, so it's not a green light, but in this particular case, with the stakes being so high and the question being reiterated to him numerous times, that's why I take the position that I do. But
I hear you. Hey, it's been I was going to say fun. Sometimes when I say that at the end of a show that's had lots of big topics, it's like I'm not trying to minimize, hey, this was fun talking about genocide. It's been great. It's been a great show. What I'll do is I'll wrap up with you guys and let you go because there's a bunch of super chats and stuff in there that I'll get to, and I'll do them without you guys here. Let you guys go. Why don't you, if you want to say anything to wrap up anything we've talked about tonight, but also tell people about how they can find you, what they can do to see you, and yada yada yada. So, Samar, do you want to wrap for yourself?
Oh, just thank you so much for the opportunity to be here along with some really great names. And I really did have a really fun time. You guys are all awesome to talk to. And it was great to have an opportunity to talk face to face to someone from Labour. So I really appreciated that first half an hour with Kieran. And yeah, thanks to you and all your viewers. You can find us at Aotearoa Liberation League on all of the social media platforms. And yeah, we'll see you guys around. Kia ora tātou.
All right, dude. All the best. We'll speak to you soon.
Ka kite.
Craig, do you want to share? I mean, look, I can help you share with what you're going to be talking about because I've got an image somewhere. Oh gosh, I've lost it already, Craig. Where can people find you, Craig?
So,
hey, it's pretty exciting.
As well as the locked out, podcast, you can find me on X, I guess we call it these days, Blue Sky, on Substack, and a range of other places. Very much looking forward, to hearing from you all about the things you want to talk about and the things you want sort of solving. And very much looking forward, we've got a budget coming up on the 22nd of May, for which I may be locked out again.
Hey, you see, people get it. You get it. Treasury, Nicola, locked out. Craig, hey, I'll tell you a little in secret, Fano. Craig, when we showed Craig some of the imagery, and let me just say, this may not be the final imagery. Let's put it out there. There may not be the final imagery. But when we started working on the imagery with Craig, Craig said, "Can you have me looking into the 7th floor? Because that's where Nicola Willis is. Is that the right place or is that the wrong floor? Where is he looking?"
So he's currently looking in the Prime Minister's office.
Oh, okay.
Which is the 9th floor, which is the one just above, which is where I'm staring at now. So it would be a couple of floors down. So you've got the Prime Minister's floor, then you've got DPMC in the cabinet rooms in the floor below, and then below that you've got Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, and probably the David Seymour on that floor.
Maybe she was up with the PM having a meeting or something when they took that photo. And look, let me just say to people, I say BHN, but you know, the company that runs BHN, that's the DOC Studios, is producing this show with Craig, and we don't have an exact launch date yet, but April is our target because, as you say, Craig, we want to be definitely up and running well by May. We're working on websites and emails and all that kind of stuff now, so stay tuned to I guess to BHN. We'll give you more updates along the way, but follow Craig on Twitter and those other places, and the closer it gets, the more we'll let you know. And yeah, and then we'll be into it, trying to get hopefully Craig won't be locked out anymore because he's now media, so they get past that easily, don't they? Yeah. All right, dude. Anything else, or are we done? Because I'll go and do this.
Just as I say, budget coming up. Lots of things to talk about. The economy is not going so well, so just really keen to hear from people about what they want to talk about during the show.
All right, dude. We'll talk to you soon, eh?
Thanks.
All the best, Craig Reading. There you go, team. There's another. What do we call this thing? The Leftist collectors for you. I want to do some of these super chats. Thank you for getting them in. You understand when we've got 5 people with different sort of timetables and stuff, we can't necessarily get to everything straight away. So here's some of your super chats. Thank you for them. Before Labour judges Greens and Te Pāti Māori for being too radical, they should remember Labour got their start in 1916 off the backs of the 1930 waterfront strike, one of New Zealand's most violent industrial strikes. Also, I guess, if you're thinking about that being too radical, even like in the 80s around David Longy with no nukes and all that kind of stuff, that's pretty radical stuff going on in the history of the Labour Party. Kai Matara, I work on your name, Kai Matara. Even ex-Labour member Quinton Finlay says Labour are right-wing. Yeah, it's an interesting perspective, isn't it, where they are today. It's interesting also hearing Craig describe who the working class was. Basically, anyone who swaps their hours for a wage. In other words, they don't have control of the capital or assets in their workplace. Now, when you describe working class like that, there are many working class people voting for the right. Think of how many people work, and what they do is they give their hours for a wage. So what was the working class, the bastion of the left, perhaps still exists, but yeah, maybe it's that the wage workers have, and like the number of them and the number of places they work in have increased. Spides is there. Spider Hoof, thank you for super chat. Hi everyone, great show. National are creating more criminals via poverty and desperation. All they care about is fudging stats as PR stunts. JC and the Pigeon Cat says, big up to Craig's, congrats. And Bubba carrying over a BHN theme. I'm not late, you are. Thank you, Bubba. JC and the Pigeon Cats, that's obviously fascism. You would have to be in a cult to think otherwise. It will happen here if we don't insist on our media being honest. Oh, this was the students being taken, I suspect. So we can get through the growing Trump bro cohort here. Gotcha. Oh, more from JC. Thank you, sir. Or ma'am, as the case may be. Craig, more work needs to be done to show people what it would look like to switch from taxing work to taxing wealth. Yep, there you go. Howie, John Key courted Peter Thiel, who got New Zealand citizenship. National and ACT are deliberately taking us the techno-fascist route planned several years back. Mystery Stranger, looking forward to Locked Out with Craig Rennie. Hold this coalition to chaos to account. Thank you for the super chat, very generous. And the last super chat for today, that's a t-shirt, Locked Out with Craig. If only we knew someone who could do some t-shirt stuff. Yeah, me and Craig have been talking about this for a few weeks. Secret's out, whānau. Hopefully, as I said, we'll be launching in April. And Craig, and I mean this with aroha to a brother, is a huge nerd. That's one of the things we love about him when he comes on, and he just will do numbers. And so that's really the theme of the podcast, delving into the numbers. You know what happens when we break the numbers down on that other show that we're not doing tonight. What happens is when you show the actual numbers, all of a sudden the PR spin, as someone said earlier, doesn't look quite so good. All right, whānau, that's me. We don't have a big flash outro for this show, so I'll just say see you later. I'll be back tomorrow night, 9 p.m. For another edition of Big Hearing News. Chewy will be in. What are we going to be talking? We're talking, I'll tell you what we are talking, Nelson Hospital tonight on TVNZ News. Massive backlogs. Also, Q&A this weekend. What was it? Oh, it was the Bish. The Bish talking about emergency housing. So there's lots of things we're already looking at for tomorrow night. So thank you for sticking around to the end. If you're here, you get an extra special bonus. And remember, one of the things you can do to be a part of this, the right's always going to have more money. The right's always going to be better funded. The right will start a podcast or a show. They will then basically actively lose money for 1, 2, 3, 4 years. And while they're doing that, they'll build a database to then be. So they're basically faking it until they make it. The left doesn't have the money to do that. But what we have is the community. So what you guys do is you share. What you guys do is you tell people about us. What you guys do is you get our clips and you talk about Craig Rennie's new podcast. Word of mouth, you spread the word. And that's how you're a part of this ecosystem of continuing to get more and more and more left comment out there, which we need desperately coming up in the next 18 months. All right, team, we'll catch you tomorrow night. I'll see you tomorrow night with Chewy from whatever that time is, 9 o'clock. Stay safe through the night. Until then, hooroo.